when you're having a human interaction with people through your preferred medium, it just makes your life easier. And we've discovered that putting texting between what would have been a physical conversation took out some of the emotion that some of these representatives sometimes had to deal with when people were highly frustrated.
I'm excited today to have our guest, Nick Drake, Global VP of Marketing at Google, on our podcast here. Thanks for joining us, Nick. Maybe you can tell us a bit about your background and what you do at Google.
Hey, Jason, how you doing? Well, thank you for having me. So I'm currently VP of Global Marketing at Google. I get to market some of our most exciting products, from Android to Chrome to Google Play to more recently Google Photos. Prior to that, I was EVP of Marketing and Experience at T-Mobile. We had an exciting transformation while I was there from 2015 to when I left in 2019.
Great, Nick. So, generally we kick off, our podcast with what we call the big question. But Nick, I thought today we'd sort of, switch up a little bit and instead just sort of, go on a bit of a journey, through your career. And I think there's some really good nuggets for our listeners today to learn around how, digital transformation, plays into the role of the modern CMO, and talk about some of the work you did there at T-Mobile and what you learned from a digital and experience and a data perspective, and then talk a bit more about some of the work at Google and really where that's heading, and really the future of data and how it relates to customer experiences, in particular around connected devices and and some of the amazing things around where Android is today, as an example. But maybe kicking things off, maybe we can sort of talk about where things started for you at T-Mobile and what sort of the directive was and what the state of the world was across data and digital experiences when you joined, and what some of your big initiatives were, when you set out on that aspect of your journey.
Yeah, the T-Mobile journey was a really exciting one. I joined just after the Uncarrier journey had begun. Uncarrier was a term that our CEO, John Ledger, had coined, and really allowed us to be a counterpoint to everybody else in the carrier space or the wireless space, selling mobile. And the notion that John came with was that mobile was broken and the way that we were selling it was crazy. In fact, I think he stood on a stage at CES right at the beginning of the journey and said that if aliens descended from Mars and humanity had been wiped out and they were trying to figure out how we lived and existed, and they saw how we were selling wireless, they would jump straight back into their spaceship and fly back to where they came and gone. And he went on this mission, as he said, to fix a stupid, broken and arrogant industry. This rhetoric was really empowering for the team. It allowed us to look at things very differently and take some bigger swings that what was once perhaps a quite traditional industry wasn't well known for, particularly in the space of disruption and innovation. So I was originally employed by Mike Sievert, who was the COO and president of the company at that time, is now the CEO, to come and run what was loosely called the digital team, which was really indicative of the state of T-Mobile's digital capabilities. Everything that didn't quite have a home had been thrown into one pot. So largely that was responsibility for our web, app, telesales, but really sitting at the heart of that was a bigger ask, which was, if we're going to continue on this Un-carrier journey and fundamentally changing the way that wireless is sold to customers, we have to meet them where they're spending their time. And this meant we required a huge digital transformation. I think T-Mobile, like many other companies at that time, had tried other routes to achieving that. And we had armies of consultants sitting in separate buildings, building a mirror version of our current business that we would one day migrate to. And I think, like many businesses, we were growing so quickly, there was never a time that intersection was going to occur, and we needed to try something else. And so I was very fortunate to be part of a larger company mandate where we authored a burning platform. At the heart of it, we really pointed out that 61% of Fortune 500 companies since 2000 have just completely disappeared because they had been disrupted. And so we needed to disrupt ourselves or become disrupted. And so based off that burning platform, we built a multifaceted plan that my group played a significant role in driving T-Mobile's transformation. And that became my primary mandate for a few years. As we thought about the digital transformation, there was a really exciting opportunity to mirror the company's core purpose and the reason for its success in winning back customers. And that was really led by our ability to listen to customers and do what they were telling us. But as we thought about our digital transformation, we saw a much bigger opportunity to democratize our first-party data and make it freely available to all parts of the business, making sure that we were reading the same data sets, the same set of analytics, and ultimately the same set of insights that allowed us to move much faster in changing the experiences that our customers were demanding that we paid attention to across the business holistically. And I think, like many legacy companies, we had over 400 different repositories that needed to be migrated into a singular and robust set. We had to go find ourselves a CDP, and we had to change the way that our analytics team appeared within the business, not in one vertical silo that belonged to one organization, but a shared resource, a lifeblood of our organization that was freely available to every aspect of the business. And it was really exciting to sit and think about how we might from scratch begin to evolve the way our business showed up in new ways that was really customer centric. And various leading indicators quickly changed over a very short period of time, whether it was reducing our web clicks to purchase from, believe it or not, 82 down to 12, or seeing our CSAT score in our app move from a miserable 3.2 stars to 4.7 stars in just a few months. And, as I look back, I think, Uncarrier was really the guiding North Star, or the principle from which the entire transformation was led, and allowed us to turn many things on their heads. And rather than try and take existing processes and make them work for new ways of bringing technology to bear in the business, bring brand new processes and organization to bear on working with these new tools and applications.
Great. Yeah. And so maybe we can dive a bit more into some of the data support. And I always reflect back on the notion of customer centricity and really just some of the work that it took to get what was previously legacy workflows that required whatever 85 clicks to get to sign up or to troubleshoot an issue and bring that down to something which is much more fluid. But when you sort of think about some of the challenges, I mean, in some sense, it's for our listeners, listening on, they can be like, oh, well, obviously the workflow was no good. How is this a data problem? This doesn't seem that challenging. Maybe you can give us a bit more insight into some of the data you collected, some of the insights you garnered, and then maybe beyond that, sort of what the team and support actually looked like to affect these outcomes.
Yeah, well, there's a lot there. I think first and foremost, I should credit a gentleman called Giles Richardson, who we hired to the organization to run our analytics center of excellence. I'd come across Giles at the Adobe Summit, and he had presented a speech called Superstar DJs. If you haven't seen it, it's worth looking at. I think he did it in 2016. But really, the essence of Giles's transformation at the Royal Bank of Scotland was trying to make data sexy and get the organization excited about the new capability and what a new data practice may do to their business in a variety of different ways. And Giles's notion was that a superstar DJ is constantly listening to its audience. And so the set that a superstar DJ would play in Miami would be different to New York, would be different to Japan. And he applied that notion to various products, and the way that the business was constantly listening, adapting, and changing their business. So Giles brought that thinking, but evolved the notion at T-Mobile and built a new program called Host. But essentially, from an organizational perspective, we did a number of foundational things. The first was we completely rebuilt our internal environment. In other words, when I first arrived, I had a cubicle and all I could see was other cubicles. It felt like death by cubicle in there. And so we built an agile work environment where we ripped all of that away and had open agile space that allowed for all the key members of a journey team to sit together. And every day was started with a stand up, and we built Kanban boards, and we had coaches in the room. And so it seems strange to be talking about such a physical item in a conversation regarding data, but it always comes back to the human beings in the first instance, while you set up all the necessary automation and get focused on the parts of the business where you can have the greatest effect. So part one was building the right environment. Part two was making sure that each journey team, and we prioritize journeys based on where could we have the most effectiveness in the shortest period of time, so we could build belief amongst our leadership team and T-Mobile's board. And each team was assigned a host that produced a dashboard from which we had very clear KPIs. And then we started that traditional loop of what's working against those KPIs, what are we going to go iterate, run the tests, and go back through the loop again, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with. But the fact that we had cross-functional team members placed together for the very first time in this kind of environment that nurtured this new way of working was pretty foundational. And then what became exciting was that I think, like many companies, we had a fairly significant relationship with a marketing technology provider. And we had set ourselves some very grand aspirations. And it became important to make sure that we removed some of that and made them more manageable, clearly defined, achievable goals. And by working with some smaller specialist providers, we began to get runs on the board overlaid on the larger instance that was being put in at that time. And so I think becoming really precise on where are we going to see the short-term improvements in our business, things like let's have an amazing customer service app, let's take the pain out of our web experience, let's begin to connect the online to offline, and allow customers to buy online and pick up in store, and make sure that the logistics team bought into that vision and were able to change the way that they served retail stores so we could deliver those experiences, became really imperative to that success, versus we'll get there in 6 years, just hold on and you'll see the results.
Yeah, and we've certainly seen that orientation around best of breed solutions as sort of a trend in the market. I think Gartner does a survey every single year around, do you prefer to work with a single solution marketing cloud provider that does everything, or do you like to pick and choose your products and SaaS applications? And certainly the trend is towards the latter. And to your point, Nick, I mean, one of the things that we see is, while there is comfort in going with a single solution marketing cloud provider, the journey to get there is multi years.
Yes.
And agility can generally be had much more quickly with sort of choosing your own path. And there's sort of another trend that you picked on, I think is also important to note, we've talked about in previous episodes, and that's this sort of trade-off between self-service and full-service analytics. And for when I sort of hear about your story and where T-Mobile was at the time, it's very interesting how I think you sort of adopted a full service model, which was really necessary for a business that was undergoing a digital transformation, had a lot of new data assets in place. Also culturally was trying to completely rethink the frame of reference around what was being optimized. It's not about dollars per square foot in a retail location. It's about customer lifetime value and customer satisfaction, customer engagement. And that transformation. Adopting a full service model where you have, as you call it, superstar DJs, who are embedded in teams, who understand what's going on, both at a technical level, but can also bridge the technicalities, into the business considerations, I think is really the way to go. If you're at the early stages of these sorts of transformations. We've seen so many stories where folks try to build self-service systems and the organization just isn't ready for it. Either technically, culturally, organizationally, or strategically. So,
yeah, I couldn't agree more. I remember the conversation where we tried to break down how we viewed AI, and it was really important to sort of take this crawl, walk, run approach to harnessing the benefits of this level of orchestration. It was sort of a commentary on what's happening now. Give us some perception, and then it's sort of moving to what do I need to know, getting notifications on things, and then should we recommend something, make a suggestion was sort of the next step, and then what should I always do, some level of automation in the business, and then moving to prediction, what can I expect to happen, and then getting to prevention, stopping some of those things from happening, and then what do I need to do right now, situational awareness. And I think one of the areas where that became most evident was we had an opportunity to completely rethink customer care. And normally when customer care is becoming digitally transformed, the first place everyone goes is job loss. Efficiency means that human beings are no longer going to be around. And I think in wireless, as with many legacy companies, we had a traditional IVR model where you would make a call, you sat with an automated voice and some horrific elevator music for an ungodly amount of time, and then eventually may get in touch with a human being who should be able to help you in some way. And so the disruption that occurred was, first of all, let's get rid of the IVR and give you an ability to directly connect to a team whose faces you could see in your app, called your team of experts who were based in your location, so could have a conversation with you about the weather or a local sports team, or at least have some context as to what's happening to you in that moment in time and create a relationship. But more importantly, what was happening behind the scenes was you weren't or didn't need to even make the call. We introduced asynchronous messaging. And what sat behind that was intent-based analytics that looked at how urgent were those messages and allowed our representatives to handle up to 14 different messages at one time, where previously they would just be on a call. So it made their time much more efficient and pay attention to those which were super urgent and get back to those because it was asynchronous and the messaging channel was just left open once established, at a time that maybe befit everyone more suitably. And the effects of being able to apply something like that were really extraordinary. As you would expect, NPS rose by 60%. We were able to reduce customer churn by 39%. But I think what we were most proud of is that our own employee happiness rose, and our employee churn went down, because guess what? When you're having a human interaction with people through your preferred medium, it just makes your life easier. And we've discovered that putting texting between what would have been a physical conversation took out some of the emotion that some of these representatives sometimes had to deal with when people were highly frustrated, and people become more reasonable on text message and take a little bit of time to consider what they want to say and how they say it. And so all round, if you look at this particular part of the digital transformation, it was really great to see the business be able to adopt something, as what that could have been intimidating to our employees and make it a superpower. In fact, I believe that the team colloquially called it Jarvis. There's this notion of Iron Man, by having a superpower helping you become a better human being, which I thought was a lovely way of looking at it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really a great example. And, at Simon, we always say that the future of brand marketing is really driving deep, personalized and thoughtful experiences. And the great thing about this story, in T-Mobile, examples you just went through is it's really sort of a matter of show don't tell. The brand hierarchy is the uncarrier carrier. But to execute on that properly, you actually have to go and demonstrate, hey, we're not some, telco that, treats you like, a ticket where you wait 3 hours and you get overcharged and the service is no good. You actually have to get in there, and show that, you can live up to, to the dream and the value. So, so execution is key and the details, are numerous.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, it's an old adage, but I think T-Mobile probably did it better than most places, which was, if you think about, people, process, technology and culture being the pillars of a transformation, we were able to take the people and culture and put it first, which was really what the Un-carrier was all about. And if you take care of the human element, funnily enough, it speeds up the digital transformation element, because technology will evolve. It just will. It just depends on the pace that you can evolve it. And as you add the right data practice and the right ability to focus on the parts of the business where your customers want you to pay attention, and give your human beings the right tools and freedom to make those fast decisions, and work with their adjacent partners that are required to get there with autonomy, everything started moving much faster than the way that we had been structured as a legacy business. And I will always carry that with me, which, of course, put the human beings first.
So Nick, you sort of made the move to Google. I think it's probably a couple of years ago now. And I know that some of the big initiatives that you're working on there, are also data related. Certainly the customer experience is central. Certainly a very different brand with very different sort of background. But maybe you can sort of touch on some of the focal points around the customer experience at Google. And I know ambient computing is a big point of focus for you and your role, and just talk about what that means from the customer experience from a data perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there were a couple of things that I was immediately excited about when I arrived at Google. I think the first, and I touched upon this at T-Mobile as well, was I was really blown away by the company's investment in AI and some of the extraordinary things that Google have been developing. I think an example of that, particularly in my team, has been some of the advances on-device computing that had enabled things like computational photography, helping photograph darker skin tones. We released a new technology in the Pixel 6 called Real Tone that allows darker skin tones to be captured in the same way that lighter skin tones have been historically. And then you see other things like live captioning on device that helps with accessibility, etc. But as you think about on-compute processing power, ambient computing immediately comes to mind and was the other thing that really captured my attention. I guess you probably should start with a definition. There seems to be many out there, but it's sort of a broad term, I think, that describes an environment of smart devices, data, AI, decisions, and human activity that enables a computer's actions to live alongside daily life without the need necessarily in the future for direct human commands or intervention. Essentially, computers quietly take care of the stuff in the background. And, Google's mission has always been to create helpful computing. And when your devices work together with, services and AI, so help is everywhere, in a way fluid, technology just sort of fades into the background and you don't need it. So the devices are aren't at the center of a system, the human being is. And, I when thinking about the Android ecosystem, we have to be cognizant that I think the average household now has 21 connected devices in it. And that's up from 2019, where it was around about 11. And so this year we've really focused on what I would call the beginnings of ambient. And we announced at CES this notion of better together, but we've really focused on how do your things, your phone, your watch, your laptop, your car, your home hub, your Nest device, your Fitbit, how do they begin to live together more easily? And so I think probably most of us are already experiencing ambient computing without knowing it, as you experience things like fast pairing or digital car keys or completing tasks, sharing across devices, etc., where you start on one device and finish on another, which is the beginnings of a incredibly helpful and exciting sort of computing future. In regards to data, this is where I'm glad to be back as a marketeer. There's far more qualified and smarter people than I am that are dealing with the challenges of how to perform analytics and the management of physical objects, thinking about low-level events and to detect signals and predict an outcome over time. I get to call that magic. And, it's really what happens when a user feels our products deliver something extraordinarily helpful. You get that feeling of magic where technology wasn't evident. And to get to tell that narrative as we deliver ever increasingly more helpful ambient device experiences is really great fun.
As a Google Pixel owner, I can certainly attest to some of the amazing functionality around automatically picking up songs that might be in the background and putting them on my lock screen, to even just how Google News integrates seamlessly with my search history and everything else. I sort of look at the opportunity in front of us. I think we're really in the early days, and for those for our listeners today who may not realize, Google also acquired the Nest thermostats several years back, and that's just sort of one of many initiatives on top of the proliferation of Android embedded devices everywhere, including I'd imagine most TVs at this point.
Yeah, exactly right. I didn't know that you're a Pixel owner. I've got to put you into the beta program.
Amazing. Great. So we're approaching the top of the hour here, or the top of the show, I should say. And first, Nick, thank you for coming on the podcast today and sharing your wisdom with us. When I reflect on the conversation we just had, it's really inspiring. Because in some sense it represents two journeys. One which is very familiar to all of us. And that's really you look at it. That really starts with a lot of the brands that we've interfaced with for many years, and a story around T-Mobile, and there have been other success stories as well that have completely revolutionized the way they've digitized their experiences. Really taken everything from their retail to their support models to their customer experience orientations and transformed them 180 degrees and put real horsepower and technology behind it. And then you have a second story around Google, which in many ways represents future state around ambient computing. And Nick, we should have you back on next year and a few years from now, where we can sort of do a follow-on to say, hey, these are the types of next generation digital experiences that everyone on our podcast can relate to. But when I sort of look at what's possible, I can only imagine. From a data perspective, the scale is really just never been seen before. With that, if people wanted to learn more about some of the work you're doing at Google, or about ambient computing, or about sort of this new world of IoT or embedded devices with Android, where should they go to learn more? I mean, is there sort of a support page at Google? What do you recommend for just sort of general resources for our listeners of the podcast?
There's an amazing resource called Think with Google. And so we have various experts talk about these sort of topics, and they're really fun, bite-sized videos that I would recommend people go have a look at. They're a great source of information.
Great. And thank you for everyone listening to this episode of the Data Unlocked podcast. And if you'd like to learn more about Simon Data, please visit us on the web at simondata.com or email us at hello@simondata.com.